Thank you, Surya, for your advocacy for India to rebalance its ties in East Asia, especially to have greater engagement with ASEAN so that it would have its voice heard in global affairs. Now, I want to thank all three speakers for keeping to the time we've allocated to them. Now, that leaves us with about 25 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to open the session to the floor. I will request that you keep your comments and questions as concise as possible, introduce yourself. And what I propose to do is to take maybe 3 to 4 questions at one go, and then the panelists can respond, and then we'll see how many we can take in, given the time that we have. May I now invite questions from the floor, please? Just raise your hands and, okay, there's a bit of a glare. Yes, I can see one. Yes, sir.
Just a short introduction. My name is Godwin Lim. I'm the president and CEO of Godwin Group. We are strong supporters of ISA, and I want to thank ISA for the kind visitation itself and kind invite. My questions posed out on the 9th of July, which is about 3 days ago. I attended the Future China Global Forum itself. Ambassadors Wu Jianming posted 3 challenges of China, one of which, the first, it is hard for the world to accept and adapt the perception of rising China. Secondly is the stress that China has a peaceful rise and there's no expansion needed for their army itself. And the third is the right perception in China changes. My question to the panel itself is one statement that Ambassador Wu made, which he stated there will be no alliances of China to the world, which I disagree. And how would the panelists react to these questions, and how India itself would react to this question itself? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Godwin. So your question is whether, China would make alliances with?
My question is that there is China's, I disagree with Ambassador Wu's statement on China will have no alliances with other countries.
Okay.
Right. My question is that...
do the panelists agree with that view?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Godwin. Can I invite the next question? Yes, the lady at the back, I think... Meena. Yes. Meena.
Yeah. Thank you. As a student of Professor Muni in SIS. My name is Bina Lakshmi Nepram from the Control Arms Foundation of India. My question is to Ambassador Si-Chak Mun. Ambassador, you've so beautifully pointed out about the look-east policy and the need for India's northeast, home to 40 million Indians of 8 states. But my question is, are you aware of the problems which are there in that region? We want to change it, and as Singapore, and your institute thought about how to get that done. Because in the look-east policy, we have just got one expert from the northeast of India within it, and there is a problem there. And so just a little question there.
Okay, this is the situation in Northeast, whether we are aware of the situation in Northeast. Okay, thank you. I think I see a hand on this side.
My name is C. Mahapatra. I'm a professor at JNU and a student of American Studies. Just one brief observation on Professor Muni's point about this pivot, Obama's pivot policy. What he raised a question, what is new? I think what is new are the following. Number one, in last 10 years when the Americans were deeply involved in 2 wars and fighting a global war against terrorism, that was the time when the Chinese economy galloped more than ever before. During this time, the US-Chinese economy became so interdependent that about 60,000 Americans living in Hong Kong with a residential address doing business, thousands of joint ventures and trade, etc., etc. Same China during this time became increasingly a military concern and possibly a challenge to the United States. Again, the timing is important because Japanophobia has practically disappeared in the region. Sinophobia is lurking behind and getting deeper and deeper into the minds of the Asian countries. China is militarily close to countries like Pakistan, to North Korea, possibly Iran. And this pivot strategy is actually more military and less economy, literally no economy. So in this complex world where a very significant economic partner is posing a challenge to American leadership, and how to address that, now that the Americans want to wind up the war in Afghanistan, how to meet this Chinese challenge is actually the key question. And looks like all the ASEAN countries, plus Japan, Australia, India, are teaming up with the USA if they agree even 50% to the pivot strategy and building a kind of hedging strategy against China. So what's your view on this?
Thank you, Prof. So I think I'll pause here to let the panelists respond first. So maybe Chakman first, and then I'll move down to Prof. Muni and Surya.
Maybe I will answer the questions I asked, that he does not agree that what Ambassador Wu said, that China does not need any alliances. But China was in fact alliance of the Soviet bloc during the Cold War days. But at the present, things have changed. I think China has recognized it is a rising power, and in the absence of any Cold War ideological confrontation, there is now becoming a policy of extending soft power, extending its own economic clout to win friends and to try to persuade countries to accept the Chinese influence, and so that China can play a dominant role in the region. In the sense that China has been getting close to Shanghai, perhaps, the alliances, Central Asia. And for South Asia, I think China has felt that South Asia has very much in the Chinese spheres of influence, as much as India look at Indian Ocean as a part of a sphere of influence. So I think for strategic reasons, the South Asia become a very important part of China because of the Strait of Malacca and access to the sea. So I think that in the sense that China does not see the need to form any military alliance at this stage because there's no Cold War. But the question of extending influence, networking, building more bridges and influences is part of the war diplomacy which any power will exercise. Perhaps I will address the question of the Northeast. In what way that, do we see the problems in Northeast? And why should we advocate, perhaps in a special report, that ASEAN and India could get to build land connectivity between Northeast Asia and ASEAN countries? Yes, we do recognize that Northeast states in India have their own problems of being landlocked, of being excluded from the external world, and being excluded from communications. And that's very difficult for countries or industries to develop in that part of the area. And that is perhaps the problems which India has to sort itself. I think you have your own Northeast ministry. I think tomorrow that there will be a conference on this one. That solve your own problems and by means that which you think will be fitting. What ASEAN can do is that by building roads and rail links and access to ports, by promoting skills development in the Northeast area, which is very close to ASEAN countries. After all, you share land border with Myanmar and a sea border with Indonesia and Thailand. Only through a process that it could increase the attractiveness of Northeast as an attractive development region. I think it's only at the end, it is where you can develop industries, where you can attract investment that will help to promote Northeast states in the longer run. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, First on the, which is now directed to me, on the question of alliances. I don't know what kind of alliances China can have in Asia Pacific, because they have almost alienated everybody in the region, with barely one or two exceptions like Korea. You know, on the whole question of South China Sea dispute, for instance, recently there was a conference in Malaysia, and the Chinese ambassador and the Chinese professors very clearly stated, where is the dispute? The region, whatever the line we have drawn belongs to us. So where is the question of dispute? I mean, this kind of a termination, the attitude of this, and telling all other countries in the region, why are you going to the US for your security? Come to us, we will provide it. With that kind of an attitude, I don't know what kind of an alliance China, even if it wants to make in the region, will be able to make. On Chintamani's question, I don't think we have any dispute here. I did say that China was a driving force. My only caution to you would be whether China is the only driving force. And that's why I inserted this question of whether US is rebalancing in relation to China or rebalancing in relation to Asia. Because if you look at the totality of the US concern, look at the domestic speeches of the Western leaders, including Obama, where there is a repeated reference that China and India or the Asia is rising, and if we don't do this, we will go, we will slide down. That's why I brought in this question of an unstated internal sense of insecurity of losing the leadership and the hegemony. And therefore, if you have to reassert and reinforce, which from the US point of view is absolutely legitimate. If you want to reinsert and reinforce your hegemony, then you must see that the Asia's rise is slowed down, or if not obstructed, or if completely, and how best you can do it. Do it in the European way. Put the Europeans against the Europeans. Put the Asians against the Asians. And this could be, I mean, this is a lurking suspicion. As an analyst, you have to take this into account, scrutinize it, and reject it. But to say simply that it is, if it is only China, then there is quite another. I quoted to you the Japanese general who said, you know, you're saying one thing and doing another thing. There is a defense continued cooperation. There is economic interdependence. These are hard facts which nobody can ignore. So all I'm saying is, yes, this is a fact, but we must look at it carefully.
No question was actually addressed to me directly, but on the question of whether China needs or does have any kind of alliances, I have a slightly different perception, which probably is a bit of a nuance. What is this all-weather friendship between China and Pakistan all about? If it is not an alliance by a different name, and India certainly knows all about that. In that sense, China probably doesn't have the traditional definitional alliance, or probably doesn't think it needs, or probably cannot have one. Whatever it is, there is some kind of friendship-oriented paradigm in China's relations. Friendship, quote unquote, whatever, with Pakistan, for instance, and this Shanghai Cooperation Organization also has an element of some kind of understanding on strategic issues between China and Russia. Then on the other question of whether, what should be India's attitude towards China in these circumstances, one of the possibilities for India, it's just one of the possibilities, India can have or can practice what may be termed as a neo-non-alignment with reference to China, and China on one hand and US on the other, and yet be part of the East Asian paradigm. Thank you.
I see 5 hands. I'm going to take these 5 questions before we break for lunch. One at the corner there, sir. Can you please keep your questions concise so that we can take them all? Thank you.
I'm Dr. S.K. Pachori from the Amity University. My question is that this dialogue between India, China, and the US should be a continuous one, and it should be aimed at avoiding conflict. And in this context, President Obama's visit to India 2 years ago was a very significant one, where he had promised or at least made some kind of a declaration that they would help, the US would help in India's aim to get into the Security Council. Now, what is happening about this? Was it a mere hollow promise, or was it just a assurance because he came to India, so to mark his presence here in India? Or is it just symbolic, just kind of a symbolic speech? But I think if India does get into the Security Council, that will definitely affect the architecture of security in Southeast Asia and South Asia as well, and mark India's presence on the world scene in a different way. At least India will be looked at in a different way.
Thank you, sir. I think there was another question just further down, or is it here now, up in the front? Up in the front first, here. Okay, to the front, first table here. There. Then we'll move on to the...
Thank you. I am R.K. Khanna, a former Chief Engineer Environment with the Central Water Commission. My query is to the Honorable Ambassador. Sir, you mentioned very important issue, development of eco-tourism in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. A lot of tourism development taking place there, but development of tourism, environment, land, water. Sir, in what way you propose this?
I think, sorry, there was a problem with the mic. Maybe you want to repeat that question quickly. This is ecotourism in
Ecotourism in Andaman Nicobar Islands is a very important area because uncontrolled development of tourism in that area is leading to degradation of environment. Land, water is a very important area. Sir, my only query is that in what way you propose to work in this area, because India Ministry of Environment and other agencies are working, and that will be very helpful, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's an important question. I think the one at the back, and then there are two questions from the back. Yeah.
I'm Kunal Majumdar from Tehelka. Ambassador C mentioned this about the Islamic threat. I mean, he just spoke about it during the Vajpayee tenure. If some of the biggest Muslim countries, especially Indonesia, is in the region, if one of the panelists could expand on this, because you are speaking about China, but another big threat is the Islamic terrorism.
Yeah. The Islamic factor. And sir, the one at the back, and then I'll come to you, sir.
My name is Mr. Janak Talsania, and I'm a retired investment manager. Mr. Mitt Romney has stated that if he's elected, he'll declare China as a currency manipulator on day one. This is directed to Professor Muni. If he doesn't do so, he's going to be labeled Mr. Flip-Flop forever. And if he does do so, there'll be serious implications for currency, trade, I mean, all sorts of political, and we could go back to a state like the 1930s. What is the view on such a scenario?
Thank you. Sir, it's in front here.
Thank you, sir. My name is Vinay Jain. I represent Wordsworth Consultants. I have a question which is based on three things. One is, it is very welcome to have increasing India and ASEAN cooperation. But after the discussions which took place, where I find the mainstream is either the US interest or US policy or the fear of China. I think we are overrating both the things, in my humble opinion. US is already a dwindling power, so is China. China became strong because they were supplying to US, now US is not buying. Chinese population is also aging, and we have people who are coming up in age, becoming productive. Should not this partnership or the cooperation between India and ASEAN countries be more based on self-development, mutual cooperation, instead of fear-based, or we have always been guided by, manipulated by Western interests. Should we continue to do so? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm afraid that's all the questions I can take, but don't worry. I need to give time for the panelists to respond. Okay, just one last question from you, sir, and then I have to let the panelists respond.
A brief question. Professor Muni, you said that China has, I'm sorry, my name is Ghare Khan. I try to follow international relations. Professor Muni, you said that China has alienated practically everyone in this part of the world, in that region. Why? Why should China want to alienate almost every other country? Is it for that domestic compulsions that they are looking out to create some tension? Why should China want to alienate anybody?
Thank you. I think I'll stop here because we need to give time for the panelists to respond, and then there'll be another session after lunch, and I'm sure there'll be related questions, so there'll be another opportunity for you to ask. So I'm going to ask Ambassador C to answer first on the Nicobar Island and the sustainability and at the same time ecotourism, and then Prof. Muni, and then
I think, the idea of ecotourism in Bay of Bengal is one of the recommendations we suggested in the special report which we submitted to the ASEAN-India Eminent Persons Group. We felt that because this is an area where it is contiguous to India and ASEAN countries, and Andaman and Nicobar's Island has been suggested there's one area perhaps both the tourist industries in ASEAN and India could cooperate to develop. Of course, obviously we are concerned about the tribal sensitivities in the area and the need to preserve their own ethnic culture. In fact, some time ago, it was mentioned that even the Indian military had wanted to develop certain parts of our Andaman Nicobar Islands into tourist resort. And indeed, one Singapore company has in fact developed a tourist spot over there. So I think this is the area of cruises, Bay of Bengal, Andaman bars, and sort of ecotourism will be one way where ASEAN and India could cooperate, perhaps give very due consideration to the environment, to the tribal sensitivity in the area. On the question of Islamic thing, it was in fact, I mean, there was, after the arrest of the Jamaah Islamiyah militants in Singapore, Malaysia, and personally in Indonesia, we do realize that there were links between these militants, and some of them have been actually sent to train in Afghanistan and perhaps certain parts in Pakistan. So in fact, I think it was in 2005 that they were found armed caches in Chittagong, which are supposed meant to supply to the northeast insurgencies. So the links were there, and that was, I think, right after the attack in the Indian Parliament in November 2001 did raise a great concern among the government's officials here that they were linked, even though perhaps not very fully established, between the militants operating in South Asia and also those in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and possibly impact on India. So this is a mention that there was a part of the main factor, or one of the factors which have driven the Vajpayee government into a closer relation with ASEAN country in terms of sharing intelligence, sharing of legal assistance program, so as to uncover those links and to tackle them through mutual cooperation.
The first question was on India-China-US dialogue. I don't know, didn't get the thrust of what you're wanting. India-China-US consultations is a proposal still. It has not been accepted by the Chinese wholeheartedly. They have given a positive indication of late after a lot of reservations. And I think they must be worried that in this kind of a trilateral dialogue, they may be cornered by the Indian and US put together. And secondly, they don't want to still, in some respects, don't want to take India as an equal partner to them. So putting it on the high table, they may be a little uncomfortable. But I think the dialogue, if it starts, good for us, good for US, and I agree with you, is good for the Chinese as well. Otherwise, India is having bilateral, I think all these three countries are having bilateral nexus with each other, whether it's a triangle or not, the relationship exists. Whether US would, don't assume that US can deliver the Security Council seat to India. It's not something which is in their purse, just take it out and give it to them. Because it's a question which is linked to the entire restructuring of the UN Security Council. There are obvious reservations, there are obvious different opinions, there are many aspirants. And it's a complicated question, I think. Though I think broadly, a consensus seems to be developing that there are no serious objections to India being there. So I don't know when it will materialize, can't really say. The question on Andaman Nicobar, tourism, spoiling environment, tourism spoils environment everywhere. I mean, I have seen people in Kathmandu say you go to Srinagar, huge tourism there, and they say this is whole environment is being spoiled. There is a basic contradiction sometimes, it is seen, between development and the kind of environment. Even dams spoil environment. It's a question which is difficult to answer, whether you want development or you want to preserve the environment in its virgin form. So you have to decide what you want to do with the people. Chinese currency manipulations, I'm afraid I'm certainly not competent to respond or address to that question. Currency is not my cup of tea, but certainly it's a very difficult question, very important question between US and China relations. We are still not there. And yes, we are taking note of the fact that many of the countries in Asia Pacific region are willing to have currency relations directly with China, which in a way is pushing the dollar out, pushing that supremacy is being dented. And the Americans are really worried about that. I think they are far more worried about the currency and financial aspects vis-a-vis China than with South China Sea or freedom of navigation, no matter whatever say. So that's what it is. US, then the question of China alienating. China would not want to. I mean, no country would obviously want to alienate somebody, but they have taken a position on strategic issues. Take Vietnam, for instance. After that line and after drawing that line, the Chinese position is that this is our line since 1947, and for us there is no dispute, this belongs to us. In the last 4 or 5 years, what they have said is that the South China Sea dispute has become a part of their core national interests. And they compared it with Tibet, Taiwan, and South China Sea, which implies, and it has some of the media reports have very clearly said, that core interest China would defend even if need be with the use of force. Now once you say that, the countries affected get rattled, right or wrong, whether you are using force or you are not using force. The fact that this proposition is available has actually instilled a sense of fear in China's neighborhood. Now they have done a huge cushioning of this through economic relations. For instance, all the countries in the region are very happy that their trade with China is growing, the economies are growing and all that. But on a strategic issue, there is a strong undercurrent of this suspicion. So I would not say that China is doing it deliberately in the sense of knowingly, but this is a consequence. The important point is that China is willing to stand by that. Knowing that the countries are afraid on this count, they do not want to dilute their position which they have taken. That's why the whole question of South China Sea Code of Conduct is hanging, in real sense, is hanging fire. And that's why these problems are coming up again and again.
I'll ask Surya to respond quickly to the last question on whether ASEAN-India relationship built on its own momentum rather than response of fear of this and that. Yeah.
To that specific question, the answer is very simple, that, also equally profound, that India and ASEAN can have and do have, to a considerable extent, a relationship which runs on its own steam, not so much with reference to China alone, although on specific issues of some economic matters, ASEAN countries do tend to compare and contrast China because they think that they have got a better deal from out of China than from out of India. Only in that limited context, but certainly it's not in terms of seeing India as a potential counterweight to China in security terms, although at one stage it was at the back of the minds of some ASEAN countries, certainly. In fact, ASEAN itself was founded in the context of China being what it then was in the international arena with reference to the US. So in that sense, it has a momentum of its own, India-ASEAN relations. But just one more point about whether China is feared or whatever. My own view is that, China has been showing signs of what may be described as anti-gravity rise in the context where the rest of the economies of the world, the major economies of the world are not doing all that well. China still seems to be pushing ahead somehow. I mean, I don't know how it is doing it, but then it's for the Chinese to know. So in that context, people meaning the other countries have some concerns about China, not necessarily a fear of a Chinese invasion day after tomorrow. But then I think China does send out mixed signals for the simple reason that China does not want to lose out on its own anti-gravity rise, whatever others may think or wish to think. That's all I can say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Well, I believe we've had a very lively start to this symposium. Excellent presentations and also very good engagement from the floor. We'll need to pause for lunch. Now, today's program is very tight, so I'm afraid we have to keep time. We have to pause for lunch, and then we'll come back after lunch for the second session, which will focus on economics, and this will perhaps explain the kinds of economic dynamics that drives India-ASEAN relations. So I'll hand over, before I hand over to the MC, let me invite you all to join me in thanking our panelists for the excellent presentation.